You're listening to Blockchain 2025. The future is right now. Every week, we explore implications of the technology underpinning cryptocurrencies. Blockchain.
Each episode is a standalone examination of one industry broken into 3 segments. A basic overview, blockchain's disruptive impact, and relevant crypto projects.
Blockchain 2025 is part of the Bitcoin.com podcast network. Learn about Bitcoin, create a wallet, and buy your first Satoshis all at Bitcoin.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Season 3 of Blockchain 2025. This is your co-host, Matt Aaron.
And this is C. Edward Kelso from the news desk at Bitcoin.com.
Right on, Kelso. So I'm actually telling you this on air. I don't know if you know this, but Taylor Pearson, who wrote a really cool article that's turned into a book, The Blockchain Man, was a special last week. So we kind of talked about, going from the company man and the 9 to 5 to the blockchain man, which really means the blockchain man or woman, but just based on the iconic company man of the 1950s and what it would look like. That was last week's special. But this is the first episode of Season 3, and I think the blockchain man kind of relates into this because we're talking about government, right? And our connection, our relationship to government as individuals, not just blockchain, but technology in general and more peer-to-peer stuff is going to change drastically this century.
Yeah. Our relationship to government is very, very important. That's obviously a pretty glib, cliche statement, but I think just for the sake of definitions and putting our terms out there, as we talk and we use these terms like state and government loosely, that we define it. And in political science, at least in the West, it's usually government is a monopoly over violence, over the use of violence to prevent violence.
The government has control, quote unquote, own the land. Yeah, so they have to keep records of what they're doing. And listen, we have a lot of anarchists that listen to the show. We also have Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians. Everyone's welcome on the show. But I think we can all agree on a couple of things about government, especially worldwide, that it's usually really big, it's slow, inefficient. You have a lot of bureaucrats or government employees that are, whether it's the system or the people or both, it takes a long time to get things done. A lot of times the private companies, consultants to help them do basic tasks, usually not so good with Excel and Microsoft Word, except for maybe Singapore. But that's my long way of saying that the government definitely has some use cases for blockchain.
For sure. And again, keeping in mind as you listen that it is this blunt instrument, it is an instrument of violence. The more accountable we can make it, or people in the future can make it, or those in more oppressive government situations can make it, arguably the better it is for those living under these sorts of systems. And again, my bias leans towards the stateless end of things, but just to kind of throw it in there as a non sequitur. If you want to read more about sort of the potential of the state or what the state is as it relates to my way of thinking, Murray Rothbard's very slim monograph, easy to read for free, we'll link to it in show notes, is called Anatomy of the State and is well worth reading and may very well blow your mind.
Okay, awesome. We'll definitely link to that in the show notes at podcast.bitcoin.com. And so, Kelso, let's contextualize this. I'll give you an example from Latin America or even Colombia. It goes like this, man. If you want to get rich in the United States, you can start a business. Go to Silicon Valley, get some venture capital, do an ICO. But if you want to get rich in Latin America, you don't start a business. There's just a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork, and it's quite difficult. You become a politician because whether it's a local mayor of a town, you gain all this power and it's not what you know and who you know. You get this Rolodex and you control the funds that are coming in from taxes. And what always happens in Colombia, they're very high taxes here, man. The taxes went up from 16 to 19%, sales tax basically. And people pay all these high taxes. They pay all these tolls. The roads aren't very good. It's a beautiful country, but you see the quality of the cities and so forth. And everyone asks, where does all the money go? You have an idea. It goes to the elite. It gets robbed, but we don't know exactly where it goes. So just that question, what if a blockchain could be audited by citizens and they could see exactly $100,000 that this small Colombian town received in tax revenue? how exactly was this money spent?
Yeah, and right away, anybody listening will instantly see the tension. Like, why would any politician worth her salt adopt this kind of transparency? But that could be to face down incumbents. That could be a myriad of different ways. But back to your initial point leading to this one, and I don't want to pick on Latin America to the exclusion of, say, the United States. The Clintons are a wonderful example of going in more or less dirt poor, and I believe at some point worth $110 million at the end of his second term. Where the hell did that money come from? And he said something about spending $10 million on legal bills or something. I mean, Jesus. And of course, Ayn Rand famously called in Atlas Shrugged, going back to my cranky libertarian roots, she called it the aristocracy of pull. That there were two ways to make money, as you outlined. One was through, voluntary trade and association. The other is just by being the man and having and wielding that blunt instrument, as we've talked about.
For sure. And I'll always favor people that make money on their own, not through political means. But yeah, I mean, I have friends that they worked at Goldman Sachs and like, oh yeah, like Hillary Clinton came in here, spoke for 2 minutes, got her paycheck, or got her donation to the Clinton Foundation and walked out. And I guess they're like, we'll get into this later about document leaking. But gosh, it was like Hillary's daughter, Chelsea, took money from the whole, like the Haiti donations to fund like a wedding or some parties and stuff. It's in the WikiLeaks stuff. But they're like, man, they have control of all this money. And
yeah. You're absolutely right. And again, I'm always wary as we talk that, we're shitting on the Clintons or Colombia or Latin America to the exclusion of other people. And this cuts across party lines, cuts across countries. As I'm sure listeners are well aware, the Bush family is a notorious parasitical force for evil on the world. So this is by no means does anybody have, ironically, a monopoly on such evil. But anyway, we don't today, from my understanding, want to focus on the evils of government so much as just setting the table for why it's important to kind of expose these guys and gals to daylight. So we're going to assume for the rest of the show that government is just going to be there, whether we like it or not, whether we want to reform it for the better or scrap it altogether and everywhere in between.
For sure. So let's go into the disruption with blockchain. And I think it starts out with uses. We're going to talk about voting, public records, communication in between government agencies.
There's a lovely clip on YouTube of Clyde Vanell, who's a very smart-looking assembly member in the state of New York, talking about some issues he had, or he's seen anyway, with public records and they're being tampered with.
It's a major problem when it actually happened in Brooklyn. 127,000 voter records expunged. I mean, how does that happen? So one of the things is that, there must have been one point of contact for that to happen. But, if the voter information was on blockchain, was on a blockchain, if it was on a distributed ledger, almost impossible to be able to do that. So that's why it's so critical for us to explore the different uses of blockchain, with the government.
So there you go. 100,000 voter records, whoosh, gone. And whether it was done nefariously or someone pressed a stupid button, who really, really knows ultimately? And that's his point. He can't find out. He's just got to kind of deal with it. And when you consider, people have died for the right to vote. So all of a sudden they're denied that franchise. That's heavy shit, man.
For sure. And just adding something in here, very high level, but corruption in elections. This has happened all over the world, right? Where how do you know that X politician won the election? Well, using zero knowledge proofs, which is mostly employed by Zcash. Zero knowledge proofs are basically being able to prove something, prove that you have information without actually giving up the information. And don't worry if that sounds esoteric, it is, but the whole idea is you could have voters registered to a blockchain. Remember, we talked about identity on blockchain 2025. Everyone has a vote, and you can prove that X politician received 33,000 votes without exposing everyone's private voting records at the same time and be 100% provably fair. So I think like a voting DApp, a decentralized app, that seems like a very positive thing to me.
Right. And just as you were talking, I was thinking too about, just to kind of harken back to Hillary Clinton here, this last election in the United States was covered, all over the world. Everybody's familiar with it because of the Donald. But getting into sort of the weeds there, she won the popular vote by something like 3 million. We have the sort of, some people consider it antiquated, there's lots of arguments one way or the other. We have the Electoral College here in the United States, so just about every 4 years we have to disabuse Americans of the idea that it's one person, one vote when it comes to choosing their executive. And that 3 million number hit me really hard, and I'm obviously not a partisan in this battle. What if it were 20 million, 30 million? This is a ginormous chance at gaming the system, at fuckery. And do you want one person, one vote? The blockchain entering into that with your DApp concept there, geez, a nationwide referendum on, I'll make it easy now, say a VAT, some sort of European version of a value-added tax, whether we want that to replace an income tax increase or something like that. Getting, I don't know how many voters we have on the rolls here in the U.S., but something like 100 million people just to log in their cell phone up, down. Wow.
Gotcha. And I realized the Electoral College was probably created because they want to make sure smaller states got some voice, but with the internet, that might be a little bit different now. But more than anything, whether it's voting for the president or just having the congressman vote on so many things, if we have the technology to have provably fair voting, the people could easily log on, today by 6 o'clock, every American citizen, with your identity on the blockchain, place a vote in. So it could be more kind of direct democracy, direct voting using blockchain technology.
And the hair on the back of my head just stood up because, direct democracy scares the crap out of me. But I think for other people, it's very liberating. They want the hoi polloi in on these decisions. And just harkening back again to Rothbard, in his case against the Fed, he talked about how the Federal Reserve is this sort of unaccountable, non-voted for institution that regulates monetary policy and essentially our wealth, and yet it's not open to audit. It's not open. So even he said, as sort of the founder of anarcho-capitalism, he was like, if you're going to have this and have a government, you should at least have a say in it. So with direct democracy, that's including everybody. So you're going to get everybody in on this idea. Again, I think it's scary, but I think for most people, it's the demonstration of fairness. Why shouldn't this person over here have a say in this idea and be, locked out or mathematically irrelevant due to geography, for example?
For sure. And a couple things there for those that are not familiar. Basically, the Treasury, right? The U.S. Treasury prints money. And when they print the money, all the bank deposits are at the Federal Reserve. But the Federal Reserve is this weird private public entity that has shareholders. And no one knows who these shareholders are, but they're definitely people in the banking sector. It seems pretty obvious there. And so they create all this money, basically lowering the value of the currency, the people that are getting paid in pensions, the dollar, they print all this money, whether it's for wars, for budget, whatever it is. And then the Federal Reserve loans this out and they receive interest on it. So basically these banks start to make so much money loaning out the money, and then the Federal Reserve Bank receives interest, makes money up to 6%. Don't quote me on that, something around there. And the shareholders of these are the same banks.
If people are just like, well, who cares? I don't care about the 6% or bankers. Well, squadrillions, which is a mathematical number, squadrillions of dollars of money, of wealth, trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars. We have technically in the United States one person by proxy to whom it is mildly accountable. So through the POTUS, through El Donald, he appoints a Federal Reserve Chair who is then ratified by the U.S. Senate. That's it. We don't even get, you know what I mean? Like through 100 people, so 101 people get to fucking decide squadrillions of dollars in credit, interest rates, your college loans, effectively your home loans. Again, that's profound. And if you throw in a blockchain idea, why not elect them through a DApp? Why not? Directly go, yeah, we want that person, assuming there's a Federal Reserve, of course.
Yeah, getting more direct democracy and record keeping. And I want to make a note here. So I have a food company registered in the state of Maryland, and there was a survey for food safety. And so I got an email from the state of Maryland. I won't embarrass the Maryland state employee, But he basically said, this survey, he sent me a spreadsheet and he said, okay, fill out the spreadsheet as an attached XLS and send it back to me. He's like, by the way, please don't call me and give me the answers. I prefer you to fill out the spreadsheet, which made me realize, okay, some people don't even want to fill it out. They're calling him and give these answers. So I realized just how inefficient the Maryland state government was, at least in their tracking of food safety. Not even a blockchain, but just a database where people can go online, submit a form, and organize all the answers there. So it's a lot of times a blockchain is a couple levels up, but it's the amount of incompetence in government, just wasting time and not sharing information is astounding, Kelso. Astounding.
The incentive structure is all whacked out. This guy is protected, or gal is protected and insulated from accountability. It could very well just be a shadow of a person who doesn't even give you their name, or some anonymous worker beast down there that's making these huge decisions. And I know listeners in their own countries and even in the United States have to deal with municipalities and housing bureaucracies and building codes and all sorts of stuff. If you could in some way empower the average voter to get in there and hold these people accountable for when they're not responsive, if not immediately, but something close to that, I think you'd see an uptick, either a complete scrapping of these institutions, which is probably for the good, or at least making them more responsive.
So yeah, Kelso, I think we made our point of the need. So let's go into the relevant projects. And I want to start with something that listeners may or may not know. Kelso, do you know what a certificate of good standing is?
No.
Just, there's 50 states. They have different names in each state, but an LLC, right, a limited liability corporation, which is actually invented in Wyoming. It's one of the most popular forms of starting a small business that technically, although it's a little bit more complicated than that if you get sued, you don't get all your assets taken, just your business assets. And a lot of times, whether you're doing trade or you're applying for licenses or international visas or whatever, you have to prove that your company is in good standing. So they have something called a certificate of good standing. And at least in the state of Texas, where I have an LLC, guys, I'm not very wealthy. I have a complicated business structure, even though it sounds like that in my other business in Texas. But basically, man,
Matt's a mogul. He's a mogul. He's just slumming with us on the podcast.
Yeah. So listen, the certificate of good standing, I had to get a certified copy, and it cost $125, and they send it to me. But really all it is just checking records in a database saying that, okay, this guy's paid his taxes and, he hasn't committed any felons under the company. And if he has, it was personal. But the whole idea there is you pay $125 for this document, this certification, where if everything was connected to a blockchain, a shared database that everyone can connect to and verify, that could be free and it could be instant. So that to me is a use case. And we had the great Caitlin Long on Humans of Bitcoin, and she talked about Wyoming. Now, Wyoming, all these LLC or business registries, Wyoming has agreed to put their business registries or LLC records on a blockchain. So, that's something right in the United States that's going to happen. And that's pretty exciting, man.
For sure. And when you have any barriers to entry like that, so maybe it's just $125 to you, which is just an annoyance. Imagine someone else trying to start a company and they need that capital for whatever reason, and they want to trade. And God forbid the agency lose it, misplace it, can't retrieve it fast enough for the other agency, and on and on and on. So anything done to expedite that process, again, create incentives that are more in line with accountability, that's all for the better. Again, we're dealing with this institution. So there are other use cases, some relevant projects. I know Estonia is using it, blockchain to secure health records. And they're on kind of shared government databases in Zug, Switzerland. There's the first digital government IDs are out there. And then, of course, there's the case of Dubai. Interesting Forbes article last year about it trying to, by 2020, kind of become the first blockchain-powered government.
Right. And also, maybe even more interesting, they want to have flying taxis and robot cops.
Yeah. We were promised jetpacks, man. Yeah. Dubai is super interesting for a lot of reasons, but they want to put forward visa applications, license renewal, bill payments, and they're saying that accounts paper-wise. Remember, a few years ago, we're supposed to enter the paperless society, which never actually happened. They're talking about 100 million documents each year to be basically on a distributed ledger database. What it is in essence, an audit log.
For sure. And so you have all these things that the government needs that take up so much money and time, and they're inaccurate, right? Birth certificates, marriage certificates, driver's license, just all these things that can be verified using blockchain. And I think that's great. I'm super for it.
And what if you don't need a mediator to get at them, theoretically?
Yeah.
If this is all public a la the Bitcoin or something like that, you could, or Ethereum, is essentially just get on your, okay, so is this person who they say they are? Again, assuming we still have banks and assuming we still have roughly the structure we have here now in terms of government, that's going to onboard, magnitudes of order people into the financial system, because one of the major hurdles is identification and, proving you are who you are and that you own certain things, and having a immutable, theoretically, at least going back, ledger to tell said person or bank or government agent that you are who you say you are is going to be ginormous.
For sure. And that's it right there, Kelso. I mean, a lot of visas, applying for a visa or, residency, you basically are trying to prove that you are who you say you are, that you've done X, Y, and Z, whether you've had a certain job, you have a certain education, that you have a certain amount of money in your bank account, that you're married to someone, that you own land, whatever they look for, that you don't have any criminal records. Basically, they're just looking for you to prove all these records, and they ask you to go through and get their certificates from all these different agencies that are not connected, and you spend all this time and money. A lot of times you have to hire a lawyer to get the visa. That to me is pretty cool. Someone who's waited in lines and countless gray hairs trying to get visas and doing all this complicated stuff and getting apostilles. Like, a lot of people in the US don't know what apostille is. You probably know what a notary is, but apostille is kind of like an embassy version, like a country stamp, not just like a local notary stamp. Yeah, I mean, there's all these businesses in DC, Kelso, that they basically go to embassies and get documents stamped for you for, whatever country you need it for. And that could all go away.
These agencies wither away, these stamp agencies, these ridiculous barriers to entry fall by the wayside. I think they can become more efficient and make it easier for people like you and others who want to do kind of global business or cross-border business. Blockchain can definitely help that, at least theoretically. So that's a good thing. There was a recent report released in the UK by a member of parliament, an MP named Hughes, where he cites, the title is Using Blockchain, Embracing New Technologies to Drive Efficiency and Empower the Citizen. They can never be pithy. But he harkens back to the Dubai case, where Dubai essentially is doing the things we talked about with regard to paperwork, but also getting together with Saudi Arabia and sort of a joint monetary authority where they're going to use digital currencies across, maybe as a settlement layer or whatever. Lots of good stuff is happening, at least potentially there, but he cites that approvingly as a way to kind of light a fire under more established legacy countries like the UK.
For sure. So I think that's positive. And as you know, if you listen to Bitcoin.com podcast network, you've probably heard me more than a few times, probably too many times, talk about it's about public blockchains, not private blockchain. I mean, there's certain things, maybe like the land rights, the deeds, would it make sense for it to be a public registry if there's no way to go back and change some things that are already there? If there's errors, I don't know. But I still would put a word of caution here that if the blockchains are private, you still have to put a lot more trust into the government. And again, even with public blockchains, there's still a layer of trust. I mean, there's the code itself. It still can be hacked. And we talked about this in the international trade episode. There is a layer of trust on humans. The blockchain doesn't remove all human-to-human trust. Having said that, you talked about building on the Ethereum blockchain. An idea I had was like a dApp, right? An application built on top of blockchain, basically, a decentralized app. And Ethereum is computing power, right? It's decentralized computing power. So I just think of, let's just say a small, corrupt Caribbean country like Trinidad and Tobago. It just, what if, they could say, okay, we're going to buy the Civic app. We're going to start using the Civic app for identity. And there's this dApp that will do our, probably better worded, not do our election, but, run our election for us. We just pay in Ethereum credits and then we can input all of Trinidad and Tobago's citizens. And yeah, we have an election app that people can access and vote on, and using the Ethereum public blockchain. That to me sounds really cool.
It really does. And on the private versus public side, for people who are familiar with Hans Hermann Hoppe and his proprietarian ideas with regard to private property, if you're not so hot on the future being, more efficient, streamlined government, but you want your own sort of covenant society. You want your breakaway sort of village or whatever of hotshot tech guys. I think there's something to be said for a private blockchain in terms of exclusivity. So that is one way, if everybody's kind of going online and distributed ledgers, audit logs and so on, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to join up. That there could be a kind of digital gated community, if you will. Again, as scared as I am by direct democracy sometimes, I can, obviously understand people going, whoa, private societies and so on. But what I'm saying for people on my sort of end of things, that seems like an equally interesting proposition. Lastly, as far as right now, major countries, Australia has some sort of deal with IBM, I believe something like basically $1 billion in USD here, to more or less do a Dubai, which is getting in there and alleviating some of the redundancies and also the paperwork.
And Kelso, a couple things here. IBM, we'll see how this works out, but I'm sure IBM, they're smart about using the buzzword blockchain, and hopefully both the company and the government of Australia did this in good faith, because that's a lot of money being thrown around there to do this. I think IBM's in a little bit of trouble, and it's worth noting, this is from the article here, quote, the contract comes 2 years after IBM agreed to pay more than 30 million Australian dollars in compensation to the Australian government for its role in the bungled national census, meaning, they couldn't count the number of people in Australia correctly. And the survey was hacked. And the prime minister said it was IBM's fault. But we've learned, we have blockchain now, so this won't happen again. So just pay us $740 million.
Very good point. Usually I'm the one to throw in the skepticism, but I'm glad you did there. Very good point. But anyway, you were going to mention something that you're kind of a mini expert in, which is Eragon.
Yeah, so I've interviewed Luis, the founder of Eragon, and Eragon, it's built on top of Ethereum, and it is a protocol for governance. So think of it this way. It's an open protocol. So Kelso, myself, someone in Zimbabwe, and someone in India could use the Eragon protocol, maybe an application on top or directly with it, doesn't matter. But for practical purposes, just know built on top of Eragon, we could form a company together, and we could, the bylaws, instead of an LLC, we could form our own company using Eragon's smart contract governance protocol and create our own bylaws and, who owns what, how will the company be dissolved, including like the assets. Maybe we each need to put in 20 Ethereum as to have 25% of the company. All that stuff can be done using Eragon's blockchain governance protocol.
Sorry, a variation on the smart contract theme?
Yeah, it uses smart contracts. So you could start these, what they call decentralized autonomous organizations, really just organizations built on top of smart contracts where all the bylaws are there. And then you don't need a lawyer to help you form a company, but you can kind of digitally use smart contracts and form your own type of company organization. And if you talk to people from Eragon, they think their protocol could be a replacement for government. I understand that's a pretty radical idea there, but that's what they believe.
If not replacing like a side-by-side, Dan Larimer of more recent EOS fame, Steam, and I just forgot the name.
BitShares.
Yeah, sorry, BitShares. His exchange. He has talked about how sort of this idea, again, going back to my cranky guys here, instead of, revolution and we all are crotch-grabbing knuckleheads with bandanas throwing trash cans at Starbucks, we instead build side-by-side kind of parallel institutions and voluntarily hope to attract people to our digital world and starve government of its main claim, which is, without us, you can't do X, Y, and Z, from roads to everything else. So I believe that's what you mean by replace government, not necessarily overthrow it, right?
Yeah, not like a coup. But I do like your example of the bandanas throwing trash cans at Starbucks. I kind of pictured you there doing that, man. But yeah, and
the 1%, man.
And there's another one. I think there's other people that are looking at this. There's one called BitNation, a crypto nation, basically using smart contracts and blockchain technology to form your own types of digital nations. And they raised, I think, like $25 million on Ethereum. The host of our Spanish podcast, Calle Bitcoin, Dumpa, he is the ambassador to Colombia. And the whole idea where, you can form your own nations with their own laws, voluntary nations, using an app. And BitNation is known for hosting the world's first blockchain marriage. But I mean, there's a lot of cool things to think about here, Kelso.
We could go on and on about this issue, on and on. And I think we should do a part 2, maybe next season or something, on things like BitNation and some of these startup societies, some of the seasteading stuff, all that, where I think listeners would find that very, very interesting. But I'm sorry, I interrupted. You were saying?
No, that's true. That's a good point. Maybe we say that for another episode, but just a preview for season 4. Think of it this way. You get a group of people that have a lot of Bitcoin and Ethereum, and they go to a small micronation and say, hey, listen, we're willing to invest in your country, but we formed our own micronation using these smart contracts. Can the embassy of St. Kitts or some smaller island recognize us as a country? And, we'll help you with infrastructure. Maybe we'll help you in terms of technology, et cetera, et cetera. And then you'll allow us you'll recognize us as a digital country. And then all of a sudden they go to a couple other nations in Polynesia and Somalia. And all of a sudden you have this digital nation recognized by 7 different, we'll say, quote unquote, traditional countries.
Really interested to see, 1, if that could ever happen, but 2, how that might shake out in terms of, accountability. And we sort of presume as fat Westerners that everybody wants this kind of sort of open society, democracy, where we all sit around and decide the fates of everybody through voting. What if people don't want that? I mean, this is stuff we're not going to get into, today, but just food for thought kind of thing. I would love to see that digital experimentation go on. So much culture influences what you think about fairness and voting and representative democracy and so on, and whether that's even a value you find. Like, how would monarchies deal with this?
For sure.
And then what would governments do in response? So if you did get traction in your Somalia, St. Kitts scenario there, would there be an all-out offensive on your digital United Nations, your digital NATO, for lack of a better phrase? But wow, that's a super interesting concept.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the beginning. I think a very important point to make and stress and highlight. One is a lot of people in government, a lot of these fat cat politicians who thrive on opacity and can take people's tax money and spend it how they like and give favors and contracts to their cronies, bridges that are never completed, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of people that do not want blockchain to come in. And this is another trick by a lot of corrupt governments, is to say, oh yeah, we're using blockchain, and just say the word blockchain, like a lot of ICOs do, to be fair, and then not actually do what they're saying. Just, oh yeah, no worries, we're not corrupt anymore. Everything's on the blockchain, it can be audited, but it's not really fair. It's a private blockchain, or they're still finding ways, maybe with smart contract code, to get around it. And then 2, Kelso, I just got to bring this up, man. I switched from the Google Doc to CoinMarketCap. Bitcoin Cash is at 863. Bitcoin is at almost 7,400. Full disclosure, we get paid in Bitcoin Cash to do this amazing podcast. That's pretty amazing, man. I think ever since we started recording, it's just been flying, man.
And I think there's a direct causal connection between our season of Blockchain 2025 and market increases. So I want that noted. Put on the blockchain for all eternity that Matt Aaron and C. Edward Kelso have caused the market pump of today. So anyway, I'm just joking about that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, well, one side effect of being into blockchain are delusions of grandeur, which both Kelso and I have. And no, but Kelso, this was cool, man. I think this is interesting. I'm excited to see how it plays out. Dubai. And okay, one last thing we got to mention. The superwoman of Bitcoin, Xdite, who was the first episode of season 2 of Humans of Bitcoin. She's this Taiwanese superstar. She's running for mayor of Taiwan, and she wants to make Taiwan the blockchain hub. The election's November. I'm sorry, not Taiwan, Taipei, the capital of Taiwan. So if she wins mayor of Taipei, again, hard to bet against her, but 35, 36 years old, Taipei will be another city to follow.
Man, and imagine the capital, the amount of money, the funds just pouring into there should she gain office. I'll leave it here on my end. If you're still skeptical about blockchain and its uses in everyday government, imagine right now your taxes coming from your income or your properties, or just your sales tax when you buy Snickers bars or whatever. Imagine being able to track those. Imagine being able to track where that money goes, how it's spent, on whom it's spent. I think the implications there are pretty wild and could change things dramatically. So I'll just leave it there.
One last example here, and it's really sad, man, but in like Colombia, people have to go through all this work and prove, and they have to go to they're born in this small town, they have to go to the government office of that small town, and they have to spend all this time and money just to prove to get their pensions. And sometimes they don't even get them from the government in the first place, but just being able to eliminate that. It's like, nope, here it is. There's no debate. I don't have to go get all this paperwork from all over the country. Pay me my pension that I deserve. I think that's another nice thing that could happen using blockchain. All right, Kelso. Well, listeners, we will see you next week. And yeah, have a good one.
Yeah, and if you can, hop over to news.bitcoin.com where we've got fantastic articles coming your way all the time. Thanks again, Matt, and I'll see you next week, man.
All right, great.
Thanks for listening to the Bitcoin.com podcast network. To learn more about our shows, visit bitcoin.com/podcast. Bitcoin.com podcast network.